Over the last few years, we've witnessed multiple storms and disasters that have left many without power. Our nation's power infrastructure is rapidly aging, and many of the components and systems are operating well past their expected life cycle, operating under more extreme conditions than they were originally designed for. Now, additionally, with the cost of energy going up around many parts of the nation, people are looking for ways to offset or completely replace their power bills. In this video, I'm going to cover Bluetti's new EP900 with B500 battery setup. It's a very capable unit that I've been using daily for a few months now in an off-grid configuration to power my office, EV, air conditioner, and other miscellaneous appliances, so I've become pretty familiar with it. I will let you know up front that these systems are not cheap and that there are additional costs associated with hiring an electrician to install this. I'm always cautious about recommending a product on the channel that's so expensive, especially when I know many of my community are facing difficult financial hardships. I do realize though that there are many that will watch this video who are in the market for a system like this, and they're going to want to know their options. When compared to other offerings on the market, it's a solid option. And for those that are interested, I hope this video at least gives you a good understanding of what this unit is capable of. In this video, I'm going to start off by giving you a quick overview of the unit. I'll then go through the features and specs, and next I'll show how my setup was configured and what I can power with it. I'll discuss how it can actually pay you money when tied to the grid, along with tax rebates. We'll also look at what it can practically power and for how long. And then I'll finish by giving my final thoughts after having tested various units like this one. Now, there's a lot to cover, so let's jump in. Overview. I do so many of these videos on these type of products that it's easy to forget that sometimes people haven't seen something like this or they're not familiar with the basic concepts. So before we go through all the specs, let me just give you an overview and explain what this unit does. In a nutshell, this is a battery system that has a capability of storing power that you provide to it either from the grid or from solar that can then be provided back to your home or the grid whenever you want it to do so. Now imagine if a storm were to come through and knock out the power in your neighborhood. If you had this connected to your home, you could still power devices like your lights or refrigerator. Now imagine that the power company couldn't fix your utilities for several weeks and you're still not getting power to your house. So then what? Well, if this was connected to solar panels, you in effect could power your basic power needs for an indefinite amount of time as long as you moderate your power usage. And when I do these type of videos, the most common question is usually along the lines of, can it power my refrigerator and for how long? To that I'd say yes, and for as long as you can power the batteries with solar. There's always some variation of this question in regards to what you can power and for how long, and I'll explain that a little more in this video. So let's take a quick look at my particular setup. To begin with, when it was installed in my house, I chose to go with an off-grid setup, meaning it's not connected to any power source other than solar panels. While this unit can be connected to your house's power grid, which we'll discuss more in a moment, my setup is a true off-grid configuration. We've got 12 320 watt solar panels that are capable of producing 3,840 watts mounted above my office that provides power to my setup. Now, Bluetti did send their team of installers to set this unit up. This top box, the EP900, which is the inverter, is connected to a breaker box on the side of my office in my backyard, which sends power to several lines. It's also connected to a grounding rod via this grounding wire. It's also connected to 4 of their battery packs, which are named B500. Now, each of these modular B500 batteries holds 5 kilowatt hours and can be stacked as 4 high and are connected together on the sides through cables they installed. For some, they may consider going the DIY route when installing something like this, but I left it up to the professional. I know my limits when it comes to something like this, and they did a great job. In a moment, I'll show powering these lines, but let me run through what each of the lines in the breaker box connected to the EP900 power and how they're set up. We've got 2 15 amp lines that run to my office and another plug-in I have outside of my office. I've got another line that runs to the front of my house that enables me to output 32 amps at 240 volts to power my EV. Additionally, the team installed a dedicated line that runs through my garage to my laundry room, which provides power to my washer and dryer. It's important to note that you can configure this however you want to power whatever you want in your house. I currently have another similar system that I reviewed before that's tied into a critical load panel that runs crucial lines I'd want to power if the grid were to go down, such as my refrigerator and various wall sockets in the house. And if you were to install a unit like this, you'd probably do the same. You'd probably tie in the critical lines that power things like your lights, your wall sockets, your refrigerator, and other crucial things that you'd want to continue operating. Now, the setup that the Bluetti is connected to is the standalone setup that I use for testing. My house at the moment is connected to my primary solar array, and the Bluetti is tied into a secondary solar array that I added a while back over my office. That's one of the other unique features of this setup. You can connect it to existing solar panels, which we'll cover momentarily. Specs and features. Okay, so I've shown you the basics of my setup. Let me go through the details of this unit. As I showed with my setup, mine is purely off-grid, meaning it only gets power from solar panels. You can, however, tie it to the grid and solar panels at the same time to power it. Now, most people, if they install this, are probably likely going to go with a grid-tied and solar setup, as it gives you some advantages to save money on your power bill, something that we'll discuss more in a moment. Now, if the Bluetti is tied to the grid, and if the grid were to go down, the power lines that are connected to the Bluetti will continue to be powered. This is often referred to as UPS, or uninterruptible power supply. Devices like your refrigerator will continue being powered, and you'll very likely not even notice the lights flickering. You've got instant standby backup power that's always ready. And when it comes to charging, it can accept up to 9 kilowatts of AC and PV, aka solar input. Now, if you were powering this with both AC input and PV, it would prioritize the solar input over the AC input. Now, regarding PV input, it can accept 9 kilowatts with 4 B500 batteries, 7.5 kilowatts with 3 B500 batteries, and 5 kilowatts with 2 B500 batteries. Now, regarding output, it can output a whopping 9,000 watts at 120 volts or 240 volts. It's also worth mentioning that you don't need to tie 2 head units to get 240 volt output like the previous Bluetti AC500 that I've covered. The EP900 inverter can handle this on its own. If you only have 2 batteries, it will output 7,600 watts. And when it comes to both input and output, this can handle pass-through charging. If you are, for example, powering devices from this unit and you've got solar charging it as well, the power from the solar will be directed to the lines that you're powering. Now, regarding storage, each battery has 5 kilowatt hours of storage capacity. If you combine 2 EP900 heads together and add another 4 batteries, you could actually achieve 40 kilowatt hours of battery capacity and double the AC output. Now, shown here, I have 4 B500 batteries for a capacity of 20 kilowatt hours. And regarding the battery chemistry, the batteries are using lithium iron phosphate. The advantage of this battery chemistry is longevity and safety. And regarding longevity, these batteries are rated for roughly 10 years or 3,500 cycles if charged and discharged daily. And after 10 years, the batteries will still function, but a reduced capability of 80%. Think about it like your cell phone. After a lot of usage, you're going to notice that it doesn't really quite last as long. Now, it's the same principle with these batteries. Additionally, since the batteries are modular, they can be individually replaced. The batteries are stored in an all aluminum steel case, and the whole setup has an IP65 protection rating, an international standard that indicates that an electrical enclosure is dust tight and watertight against light pressure water spray. So you can either store this inside, or as shown here, I keep mine outside on my back patio covered by a patio roof. Now, the other unique feature of this setup is that it can work with an existing solar system if you already have one. And for solar, it's going to accept between 150 volts to 500 volts at 25 amps max for a maximum of 9 kilowatts. Now, shown here, I have 2 solar arrays, and with each leg of the array producing 1,920 watts with a combined output of 3,840 watts. The EP900 has 2 MPPT chargers, so I wired my 2 solar arrays to connect to the 2 MPPT channels. And regarding the warranty, it has a 10-year warranty, which is, in this industry, pretty solid. About connecting with the device, you're going to notice that there's no touch screen on it. Everything is controlled through their app, which allows you to connect via Bluetooth or via Wi-Fi. So if you're away from your home, you're able to monitor via their app. And regarding the app, it allows for a high degree of customization. You're able to change various settings and monitor the performance. And as shown here, I can actually see the real-time PV charging and output. And finally, when it comes to operating this in cold environments, the batteries are self-heating so they can perform properly. What can it power? Okay, so we've run through the specs, but let's start looking at actual uses by answering the question, what can it power and for how long? So to practically answer that, I'll show you how I've been using this since I had it installed a little over a month ago. Let me show you some numbers so you can see how this practically works. The solar array I have installed provides roughly 20 to about 21 kilowatt hours each day on sunny days. So that allows me to decide what I want to dedicate that power to. So let's run through the numbers. When I run my office AC, it pulls 1.2 kilowatts. I typically start this at around 12, and then I turn it off when I leave the office at about 5 o'clock in the evening. So that means we're gonna need 1.2 kilowatts for 5 hours, or 6 kilowatt hours to power the air conditioner. Now next, while operating my computer, I'm gonna pull about 250 watts each hour. And I run this for about 9 hours each workday. So that's about 2.25 kilowatt hours of usage. And to power the other miscellaneous devices in my office, I can expect about another 1 kilowatt hours of usage throughout the workday. So that's a basic day to power my office, which means I'm pulling about 9.25 kilowatt hours. That leaves us with 11.75 kilowatt hours of energy left to use as I want. So overnight, the internet and other devices I'm powering will pull another 1 kilowatt hours. So for a 24-hour cycle, my office will need roughly about 13 kilowatt hours. So this leaves about 7 to 8 kilowatt hours, give or take, to power other things like my EV. Now, that's just one example. Some days I don't even need my AC if it's not too hot out, so that frees up about another 6 kilowatt hours, leaving me with closer to about 18 kilowatt hours to power whatever I want. So let's look at powering a washer and dryer. I have a gas dryer, so both the washer and the dryer can be powered with a standard 20 amp plug-in. And as you can see here, when I operate both the washer and the dryer at the same time from the line that's coming from the Bluetti, you can see I'm pulling roughly about 1,000 watts. So let's say I want to power all these things at once. My office and AC, the washer and dryer, my EV, as you can see, I'm close to the maximum output of this device, which can output actually up to 9 kilowatts. And once the batteries have topped off, the EP900 will no longer accept power from the solar panels. So it's during these peak production hours when the batteries are topped off that I start charging things like my EV. For example, if the sun is going down and the batteries are at about 30% left, that's not the time I would typically charge my EV, as it pulls a significant amount of power, and I like to have at least about 30% in reserve going into the night. So instead, this is usually the time of the day when I leave the office and I power most of the electronics down. And when I come back in the morning, there's usually about 24% left in the batteries. I then let them charge up in the morning via solar. And around noon, when the sun starts warming things up and the battery may be charged to around 60% or so, I typically start running the AC in my office and then charging my EV. And the point I'm trying to make is that you have to monitor and really begin to learn the patterns to understand when to run devices and when to let the batteries just charge. So to answer your question, how long will it power a device? Let's answer that question by going over to a tool that I created that will show you how to calculate how much this device will power and for how long. And I'll post a link in the description and comments section below to this tool. So what we'll do right now is look at my desktop, and as you'll see, what we've created is a calculator. This is a new one that we've just updated a few days ago. And what we've done compared to if you used our calculator in the past is we've added a new column that allows you to define the amount of time that you want to run a device. Well, what's the application here? Let's say the power goes down in your neighborhood or whatever, and you need to power some devices. Well, there's some devices that you may run for an hour or two. There's some that you need to run for as long as the power's out. So what we've done is we've made this adjustment, we've made other changes to this calculator to reflect real usage. For example, if you were to say, hey, I need a hot plate. Maybe I need to heat up some water, and I only need to use it for maybe an hour each day. I'll use it to heat up some food or some water, and that's it. In total, that's how much I'll use for a day. But I've got a freezer, and I need to run that, in a given 24 hours, I'm gonna need to run that all day. So I'll say 24 hours. And I need to also run this other refrigerator over here. And what you're gonna see, by the way, is this column right here, column B, it tells how many watts this pulls each hour. So what we're doing is we're defining the amount of time and then the number of devices. So if I have one refrigerator freezer and I have one 18 cubic refrigerator, I'm gonna say 1 and 1 for each one of these. And the same thing for the hot plate. I'm gonna run that for one of those for an hour. So you can see some have different amounts of time. Now the point is, is that you need to populate and change these values based on your particular usage. And let me point out one thing: before you can actually use this calculator, you will have to go to File, make a copy, and you're gonna have to copy this to your Google Drive. What is a Google Drive? Well, if you're logged into a Gmail account or you're making YouTube comments or comments on a YouTube channel, you have a Gmail account. So if you make a copy, you can put this in your own drive. You're not gonna be able to edit this spreadsheet until you make a copy. Okay, so what I've done is I've shown you a few variables that we can change based on real scenarios where, say, hey, I need to, charge different devices in a 24-hour period. Now, if I come over here to the Bluetti EP900, we see that we have a running watts of 9,000. We're, pulling these different values here. And what's happening is at the very bottom, it's gonna tell us how much you have left over in your watts after you run these different devices. So in this example, again, we're running a refrigerator and freezer for 24 hours, a hot plate for an hour. So we've still got about 1,100 watts that we can work with, or 11 kilowatt hours. So I'm just gonna give you another example. If I were to say, hey, I have an EV and I wanna charge it for an hour, and I've just got one. And again, I know this is an extreme scenario, right? I mean, if the power's out, your priority is probably not an EV, but I'm just giving you an example. It can pull, let's say hypothetically, it's pulling 8,000 watts each hour. Well, if we were to come back over to our Bluetti right here, we see we still have power left over. Now let's push it over. Let's say, you know what, I want to charge this for 2 hours. Well, I come over here and I select 2 hours. Well, as you can imagine, it's going to overshoot. So if we come back over here to our Bluetti EP900, we're now using 24,000 watts, 24,200. So we've overshot by 6,600 watts. So this calculator allows you to play around in real time to allow you to decide, well, okay, maybe, charging my EV is not a smart idea, so I want to run other devices. And again, you can come over and edit these devices. You may say, well, how do I find out how many watts each one of these devices pulls? There are spreadsheets that are online. I'll post one below. That's a very common one. And again, if you're not familiar with how to do this, we do have a video, again, which I'll link to below, which goes into a lot more details explaining how you find these values. It's not that complicated, to be honest. But this, in a nutshell, allows you to determine, if you don't have solar panels, how much can you use from this battery? Now, obviously, if you have solar, that's a different story, which we'll talk about now. So as I just stated, of course, the calculator only shows if you have batteries and no solar. Well, what if you have solar as well? The challenge, of course, when we talk about how much solar can produce is the variables. Your location, your time of the year, your angle of the sun relative to the panels, the temperature, sun exposure, etc. I live in an area that's near perfect for solar, so what I produce is really great. For 3,820 watts of roof-mounted solar panels during the summer, I can typically get around 21 kilowatt hours of solar each day. That means I'm experiencing a factor of about 5.5 times the amount the solar panels can technically produce each hour. Now, that's a pretty solid number. The average panel production per day will typically be between about 3 to 5 times. So, for example, if you have a 100-watt solar panel, under just 100-watt solar panel, under normal circumstances, you would probably get roughly 300 to 500 watts per day off that panel. So on the low end, you could probably expect about a factor of 3x based on your solar array size. Let's just say you have a solar array of 9 kilowatt hours, the maximum this device can handle. If that's the case, on the low end, you probably can produce about 27 kilowatt hours per day. Now, if I had a 9 kilowatt solar array, I could probably expect around about 50 kilowatt hours of production each day. Again, these are all rough estimates and it changes based on your variables. What I'll do is I'll link to a webpage that I found while preparing this video. It has a lot of information you need to figure out about how much solar your setup could produce based on your variables. In the future, I'll definitely work on building a calculator for this, but this will definitely suffice in the meantime if you just want to research this more. Money savings. So let's talk about the financial aspect of this system. Again, before I jump into the discussion, let me say that I completely understand this unit is very expensive, and out of respect for my audience, I want to point out this fact is not lost on me. I do these reviews not to push a product, but simply to let those that are in the market for something like this know their options. Now, this setup I have with 4 batteries retails for about $17,000. Delivery and installation costs another $3,500. And with the federal tax credit, you can expect to knock off roughly about 30% from the main Bluetti system itself. So in my case, that would shave off about $5,100, bringing the cost of the Bluetti to $11,900 after getting a tax credit back. Now, of course, the question is ROI, or return on investment. How long would it take using this to pay for the initial cost of the unit? Well, it turns out that this unit can also make money apart from just solar feeding power back to the grid, which in and of itself can save you money. But let's look at it from the perspective of just the battery. Power companies are beginning to charge more during peak hours from 4 to 9 p.m. each evening when people are coming home from work and they're turning on a lot of appliances. The demand for the grid actually goes up during that time. So in my area, the cost per kilowatt actually more than doubles during that 4 to 9 peak period. And during this time, you can actually program the Bluetti via the app to provide power arbitrage. What does this mean? Well, you have two options. Either you can send the power in the battery pack that you have stored to the grid, and they'll pay you at the higher amount per kilowatt, or you can perform peak load shifting, in which you program the Bluetti to send power to your house during the peak hours so you're not pulling as much from the grid. Again, different power companies handle their costs differently, so you would need to check with your specific utility provider, but for me personally, this saves me a lot of money. I charge my grid-tied whole home system battery setup overnight when it costs 22 cents per kilowatt hour, which means it will cost me about $3.52 to charge it overnight. And when I push that back to the grid during the peak hours from 4 to 9 each evening, I get paid $8.80. So that means I pocket a net $5.28 per day. And for a typical month with 30 days, I'm getting paid about $158. Now, over a year's time, that almost comes to about $1,900. So if we divide the cost of this Bluetti unit after the tax rebates, let's just say $12,000, by $1,900, the amount that I get paid each year, it would pay for itself in 6.25 years. Of course, if I were to charge it in the morning from solar instead of charging it overnight from the grid, that would mean I could pocket about $3,200 per year, which would mean I would break even on this in about 3.75 years, nearly half the time. Now again, even after the 10 years of daily usage, the batteries will still store 80% of their original capacity, which is still very useful. So it's got a long life ahead of it even after being paid off. But those are just my numbers. I would encourage you to check with your local provider and plug in the numbers as I just detailed. Final thoughts. I think we're living through an exciting time with renewable energy and whole home backup power. The market is exploding with these types of battery options, and this product from Bluetti is a solid option. I've reviewed their products for a few years now, and they're on my very short list of manufacturers that I'll work with in the future when doing these type of reviews. And as I mentioned, I've had it for a little over a month now, and it has become an integral part of our power system, powering my office and EV on a daily basis. I like the modularity of the system, the warranty, the ability to be able to monitor the battery remotely, the amount of solar I can accept, and the amount of power that I can output. What I'll do is I'll post a link in the description and comment section below if you want to check this out. If you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to post those below. And again, I'll post a link to the calculator that I went over in the video below if you'd like to play around with that to see if this can power basic things that you have if the grid were to go down. As always, please stay safe out there.